Hello and good day to you. My name is Tracy Harrison from the School of Applied Functional Medicine. Today we're going to be talking about the gut. It's such a boring thing through so many different lenses, but the past decade in particular has really started to shine a particularly bright light onto just how much what is happening in the gut is regulating the rest of the systemic body. I'm going to go ahead and dive right in because we're talking about the gut, which means we have a lot to talk about. And I want to start off with some fairly lowly types of topics in the body and hopefully reframe our perspective on them. One of them is the importance of bowel movements. Now, if you've been studying functional medicine for a while, this is not a surprise to you. You know about this. But I want to talk for a moment about how often we don't learn until much later in our clinical engagement with a patient or a client that there is a motility issue, there is an excretion, a detox clearance issue, because people don't necessarily talk about their bowel movements after the age of, say, 5. And when you ask someone if their bowel movements are normal, well, if they're normal to them, they're going to say yes, even though they may only have 1 or 2 bowel movements a week. And so it's really critical to get down and dirty when you chat with people about their bowel movements, right? What do they look like? Do they float? Do they smell? How often do they have them? Are they easy to pass? Are they hard to pass? Is there a lot of straining and grunting involved? Do they have a history of diverticulosis or diverticulitis, which might point to a common disease side effect from being constipated? But really diving into what might be at play. It's a good reminder that, of course, bowel movements are not just an annoying, necessary physiological habit. It is the final critical stage of phase 3 detoxification, whereby we need to get toxic waste products and metabolic byproducts out of the body so that they don't sit and stew the precious colonocytes in the large intestines in that toxic mess. We really want to be taking out the trash frequently. And so if you're looking for an arena of rapid relief in order to help delight and your patients and galvanize their belief in you and your capability as a practitioner, help them to restore optimal bowel movements and motility. I've had an astounding number of my own clients tell me that that has felt transformative to them, where they may have spent years or decades being chronically constipated. Now, but there are a number of things that are involved in chronic constipation. The completely non-sexy reasons in particular are the fact that people are dehydrated. You have to have water. And you also want to have fiber in order to bulk up a stool, but you need water in order to actually hydrate soluble fiber so that it softens up a stool for easier movement through the intestines so that there's less likelihood of gas and bloating and distension and flatulence, this type of thing. But many people are dehydrated, and that is absolutely going to contribute to constipation. Many people have insufficient levels of magnesium. We've spoken of this many times, and it is a common nutrient deficiency because due to global, I believe, topsoil erosion issues, magnesium is less prevalent in our soils, so it's less prevalent in our foods. And if it's not in the food, it's not going to be in our bodies, and we're going to have a greater challenge providing sufficiency of these key minerals. Magnesium being particularly key in this particular context for optimal contraction and relaxation of muscles throughout the body, including the GI tract. Women in particular are more likely to struggle with sluggish motility and constipation because of hypothyroid function. We've done entire segments on that. I think the biggest challenge we see in practitioners these days is that we've learned to look beyond TSH. We're looking at T4 and free T4. We're not necessarily looking at T3 and free T3 in order to understand intracellular thyroid function and whether or not it's optimal, not just whether it's normal, whether it's optimal for that actual individual. And so sluggish thyroid, sluggish lots of things, including gastrointestinal motility. And so these are things we want to consider with regard to challenges. A surprising thing you want to think about with motility overall, so leaving the concept of just bowel movements, but the whole notion of wanting to have good, smooth, progressive peristalsis throughout the entire GI tract, which naturally moves the progressive chyme or metabolic fuel for our microbiome throughout the GI tract, right? When we chew up food and swallow it, that's the first and the only part of digestion that is actually voluntary. Everything else depends on the natural, regulated process of motility. And one of the things that can overtly impair this is actually neuropathy. It's a good reminder that the vast majority of things in our torso that keep us alive and thriving, everything from our breathing, the action of our lungs, to our heartbeat, to our liver function, to our digestive secretions, is being delivered courtesy of stimulation from the vagus nerve. And the vagus is the body's primary parasympathetic nerve. But nerves are tissues. They need to be nourished like everything else in the body. And we know that there's certain disease dynamics like type 2 diabetes that can contribute to neuropathy. And yes, neuropathy is not just a matter of making people's fingers and toes tingly or numb. It can impair central neural transmission and can interfere with gastrointestinal motility. And of course, individuals can also have autoimmune types of dynamics that can interfere with that. But when you're supporting an individual who has peripheral neuropathy, say from type 2 diabetes, or maybe from insufficient levels of vitamin B12, which is particularly prevalent as we age, especially as we move into our elder years. But for that matter, your patients who have type 2 diabetes, who are more likely to have peripheral neuropathy, are also more likely to be taking metformin, which overtly impairs the absorption of vitamin B12 in the ileum. Very strong coincidence of that. And so you can end up with someone who has peripheral neuropathy plus insufficient B12 and an unfortunate pharmaceutical mediated gotcha. And then, yes, their motility is going to struggle. And motility, my friends, is a boring gut topic. And it's like the squeezing of muscles in order to move things along, like progressively taking out the garbage. It's like a sewer pump. Not a very exciting topic and not something we tend to focus on at all until it stops working. And then we pay attention in a big way. But we need to explore as practitioners and learn to master the concept of motility, because the vast majority of microbial mediated dysfunction in the gut is kicked off upstream by dysmotility, because we have an incredible planetary level population and diversity of microbes in our GI tract. About 1.3 of them for every one of our cells, but hundreds of times more genetic material. They play a massive regulatory function in the body. At SEFM, we often say the microbes are really in charge. You could easily argue they might be the host of us, given their regulatory capability. But the entire GI tract, from a motility, a pH, the thickness of our mucosal linings, the level of immune oversight and antimicrobial peptides that are released, all of these things are shifted and modulated throughout the entire GI tract on purpose to allow, in some spaces like the colon, to allow the microbes to thrive and feast, right? And provide tremendous regulatory function to our body, generate all sorts of nice, not only symbiotic, but I think true mutualistic secretions. They make vitamins, they make neurotransmitters, they make hormones. They help to regulate the balance across our microbiome. In particular, they produce short chain fatty acids, which leave the gut and go and do amazing things in the systemic body, like help to regulate the integrity of the blood-brain barrier and help to regulate our metabolic functioning. Now, we don't frequently think, when we see elevated triglycerides, do we think about, that might be short chain fatty acids. Another great example of how disease can be actually begin in the gut, and so much of that regulation originates from the microbiome. But here's the thing: if we aren't optimally digesting our food and optimally moving that bolus of chyme that is generated from our food throughout the GI tract, experiencing progressive digestion and absorption, and then metabolism, and then excretion, then we are giving our microbial friends an opportunity to overfeast at the food fodder buffet. This is not good on any level. Our microbes are designed to thrive with a very well-honed subset of debris, right? From our particular diet. And microbes can feast on a lot of different things, right? It's not just fiber, which we tend to think of, right? It's in terms of complex carbohydrates, starches, fibers, but also sugars, all the different saccharides, and yes, amino acids. Able to ferment amino acids, and also fats. And it's actually particular bacteria, especially sulfur-reducing bacteria that can get us into trouble as they feast on fats and bile acids. So suffice it to say that if we're not doing a great job of digestion and motility, then the microbiome is going to be opportunistic and have a field day, and much more be likely to overgrow and create symptoms of IBS, which is annoying and debilitating. That can create gas and bloating and distension and belching and flatulence, and typically diarrhea and or constipation. It's a major disease dynamic of suffering in our current patient populations. But those are mediated by imbalances in the microbiome that most often are created originally by dysmotility. And so when we think about motility, we want to be thinking about, as I already mentioned, what is the health of the nervous system, right? Do we have issues? Is there excessive oxidative stress in the body? Are markers like HDL notably elevated, too high? Gamma glutamyltransferase, a liver function test, is it too high, even in the upper half of the reference range as a marker of excessive oxidative stress? Are markers like uric acid and bilirubin, are they notably low, which might show that there is an overload of oxidative stress, right? Creating redox imbalance where the body is experiencing a depletion of its antioxidant function. These are markers as practitioners that we can look at. But we've got to take care of the nervous system, and we need to keep in mind that, yeah, we have some medications that purposefully interfere with the nervous system, like opioids, for example, or anti-seizure drugs that can be overtly creating disease in the gut. But on top of thinking about the nervous system, we need to remember that dysmotility, not just constipation, but dysmotility can result from hypothyroid function. Dysmotility can result from suboptimal serotonin synthesis and transport and metabolism in the body. Histamine also plays a role with regard to motility. And then the health and activation of the vagus nerve, and acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter at play there. But again, the vagus nerve is a parasympathetic nerve. And motility and digestion are activities that the body activates in a state of rest, digest, heal, and make babies. It is something that is purposefully hampered when we are living in a fight, flight, and hide sympathetic nervous system mode. And so stress all on its own can have some highly debilitating effects on the vagus nerve. And we can actually really help our patients to understand what simple lifestyle choices and self-care habits can activate, stimulate the vagus nerve, can activate the parasympathetic nervous system in order to overtly improve their digestion and their motility. It's not rocket science. We don't need a drug for that. that. We just need people to slow the heck down and realize that if they're rushing and going and doing or stressing and ruminating and worrying and they have IBS, nothing is broken in the body. The body is working exactly as it was designed to work. But you're telling your body with your behavior, in particular your thoughts, that your survival is not assured and you need to fight, flight, and hide in order to make sure you don't die. The body's not judging the reasons you do that. It's just responding to the cues and clues that you give it. And so, especially in these strange and wondrous times on a global scale, a lot of people in our practices spend a lot of time worrying and ruminating and presupposing all of the different badness that could take place. And of course, our own nervous system is eavesdropping on all of our thoughts. As I often say, you don't fake out your own nervous system about the status of your stress. You can put a happy face on your stress in order to feel more acceptable to all sorts of other people, including yourself. But you don't fake out your own nervous system about the source of the status of your stress. It knows. It's there. It's paying attention. And so our thoughts, our ruminating, our worrying, our catastrophizing, all of these things can contribute greatly to more dominant, a more frequent sympathetic nervous system mode, which purposefully impairs digestion and motility by design, because it's sending blood flow to other tissues that are more important than your gut if you need to fight, flight, and hide. It's supporting things like your skeletal muscles and your vision. When you're in a sympathetic nervous system mode, your digestion is broken on purpose. You have insomnia on purpose. Your detoxification is broken on purpose. You have infertility on purpose. Your immune system is suppressed and hypervigilant on purpose. Because if you were really running for your life, all of these purposeful actions of the sympathetic nervous system would promote survival. And it has for millennia, which is why it's still doing it. And so much of what people are wrestling with in the gut is not evidence of anything being anatomically or physiologically broken, but rather the body is working exactly as designed. And we can learn, we can educate and inspire and empower patients in order to be aware of this and to begin to develop a discipline around self-care and to make different choices so that they themselves can be empowered to make their symptoms go away by restoring their body's more frequent parasympathetic functioning, which I have seen have some incredibly dramatic and quick improvements with regard to IBS-related symptoms. So motility is really essential. Another key part of motility that we often don't talk about, it's actually part of the innate immune system, actually part of the passive immune system even, but certainly the innate immune system, is the migrating motor complex, which is constantly, ideally, around the clock, providing cleansing waves, especially throughout the GI tract, but especially in the intestines, which helps to discourage microbial overgrowths and also helps to sweep away potentially toxic or pro-inflammatory secretions and debris from our microbiome, including maldigested foods. But the migrating motor complex is a parasympathetic function. It also will not happen while we're actively digesting foods. So if people, especially as a stress management or a stress triggered behavior, if people are grazing on food all of the time and they're not allowing for a good period of time between meals, I would say at least 3.5 hours, which is the bare minimum to create a window where digestion is largely complete in the stomach and at least the duodenum and the jejunum in order to allow the cleansing wave to begin. And then the cleansing wave itself takes about 75 minutes, an hour and a half. And so we need to allow at least 3.5 hours, ideally more in between meals, because otherwise your body's own housekeeping crew is not able to do its job. So yes, of course, you're going to end up with maldigested food, again, providing more food fodder at the microbial buffet. You're going to end up with more potentially pro-inflammatory secretions and byproducts, as well as debris from our microbiome, is going to be more likely to contribute to wear and tear on that precious mucosal lining that lines our GI tract, especially our small and large intestines. And let's switch gears for a moment to talk about that, because you want to have a good, thick layer of scum in your intestines. And let's talk about it like it really is, because the reality is the inside of the intestines, especially the large intestines. If you were to zoom in on a microscope and really take a look at everything, it looks like a grade B science fiction movie with an incredible amount of warfare and weaponry and creatures dissolving each other and eating each other and throwing bleach on each other. It's a crazy, crazy world in there that regulates itself. And it's essential that it maintains the ability to do so, because we want to keep a symbiotic, mutualistic relationship with our microbiome. They provide so many benefits to us, and we provide so many benefits to them. But it's a tension that has to be well maintained. And I think the best example of where that's maintained is actually the mucosal lining. The functional medicine world these days talks a lot about leaky gut. More accurately phrased, enhanced intestinal permeability. Because the intestines by design are already slightly leaky. That's not a new thing. Of course, especially the small intestines, we want to get nutrients in and keep the microbes out, which requires a balance in permeability. But just like if you were to take a colander that has well-controlled little holes in it and punch much bigger holes in it, you might have way too much of your spaghetti getting through the colander, right? It's not going to have the appropriate barrier control. Well, the same thing is true of the gut lining in both the small and the large intestines, which can promote disease for largely two different sets of reasons, actually. But here's the thing. The gut lining, the epithelial lining of the intestines, which has all of these folds, right? And the cellular chain that goes over the villi, and all of these enterocytes that are absorbing nutrition in the small intestines from our food. The surface area of the small intestines is the equivalent of a tennis court if you map it all out, because of all of the nooks and crannies and the villi and the crypts. It's a huge amount of surface area, which is essential for enabling optimal absorption of the nutrients that come from your food. But this precious gut lining is coated with a mucosal layer, a mucus layer, a scum layer, right? Which is something that is a mixture of largely water. Typically the mucosal lining is about 90-95% water, along with mucin that is being produced by the gut lining, and microbes and microbial secretions, especially those polysaccharide secretions. And it's creating this symbiotic sludge. And the mucin in some cases feeds the bacteria, and in some cases is countering the bacteria and providing a physical blockage that keeps them from being able as readily to burrow down. And what you end up with is a biofilm, which is a scum layer. It's actually a very good thing. We form biofilms all throughout the body, right? If you're women, if you have an IUD, you've got a biofilm around your IUD. If you've got any artificial body parts at all, but we also have biofilms in the stomach, in our gallbladders, in our ears, on the surface of our eyes, right? Generally speaking, microbes do not exist alone. They like to sleep with friends. And so they have communities, symbiotic communities where they work together. And this is also what protects microbes from being killed off by our immune system or by an antibiotic. Actually, a good resistant bacteria can be hundreds or even 1,000 times more resistant to antibiotics if they are incorporated deeply and richly into a scum layer, a biofilm layer, where they're protected. And this is where it's so important to have good digestion and to have good bile function, because those are some of the things that help to keep the biofilm under control in the body. And so, let's see, going back to talking about the mucus layer, if you want to not get enhanced intestinal permeability, which takes some of the chaos that's in the gut and allows the immune system down in the gut-associated lymphatic tissue to get overexposed to all sorts of pro-inflammatory things coming from the body, especially lipopolysaccharides. If you want to protect that gut lining, the most important thing is to have a good, thick, constantly renewing, so fresh layer of biofilm. And perhaps not surprisingly, what stimulates the formation of good biofilm? Well, first of all, you got to be hydrated because there's a lot of water incorporated in the biofilm. The second thing is the synthesis of mucin is stimulated by fiber. It's stimulated by fiber, both directly and also indirectly via the microbes. Because remember, it's a synergistic teamwork. It's like a détente that we have with the microbes, right? Where the microbes are ready to overgrow and our immune system is ready to kill them. And it's this tension. And we keep this beautiful symphony of détente at the mucosal interface that keeps a fascinating mutualistic relationship between two different forces, two different organisms. It's a deeply impressive balance. And the integrity of this mucosal lining is everything. So yeah, friends, we need to eat fiber. And we need a diversity of fibers because a different fiber has different mucin stimulatory effects, again, both direct and indirect. But not surprisingly, what are other things that stimulate the synthesis of mucin? Phytonutrients from plant foods. We go back to the notion that food provides macronutrients, but food, especially plant foods, provide micronutrients. And it's not just vitamins and minerals and the stuff that we talk about on labels. It's the thousands and thousands of different varieties of phytonutrients that we get in a rich diversity of foods. And the phytonutrients in, say, a grape are very different from the ones in a lemon, very different from the ones in arugula, very different from the ones in an onion or a banana or a strawberry. And so this is where diversity of phytonutrients makes a big difference. And so diet, my friends, the diet stimulates the protective mucosal lining, which protects the enterocytes in the intestines. It's protecting your barrier function, which is the number one thing if you would want to protect if you don't want to get autoimmune disease, right? You want to keep the chaos of the gut, right? That grade B science fiction movie. You want to keep that in the gut. You don't want it selectively trickling into the systemic body and promoting other downstream disease in the heart, disease in the brain, disease in the joints. This association of enhanced intestinal permeability and various types of systemic disease has been very well demonstrated over the past 15 years of research. I still remember 15 years ago where if you use the phrase intestinal permeability, you was probably only going to be a matter of seconds before someone called you a quack. But right now, if you're a geek and you enjoy research, pretty much every week there is some really fascinating study, maybe dozens, some weeks, published talking about the richer, deeper understanding that we have of how barrier function is damaged and how specifically that is a mechanism for systemic inflammation and how that can contribute to a rich diversity of other diseases. And that's for so long we've neglected the gut. When we think about Alzheimer's disease, we neglect the gut. When we think about rheumatoid arthritis, we neglect the gut. When we think about chronic urinary tract infections, right? And that's a mistake because these are all diseases that can begin in the gut. And yes, exactly, we have to keep the chaos maintained. And so we need that mucosal lining. We need that mucosal lining. So here's the thing. Medications can interfere with the health and integrity of the mucosal lining. In some cases, they can directly contribute to oxidative damage to the enterocytes themselves, even below that. And it's so interesting that we think about the mouth as being a vehicle for a lot of different drugs. It's like a coin slot for medications. You know, it doesn't really matter as long as you get it in there. Oh my goodness, it matters in a big way. We need to find a different intake route for medications because we are creating systemic disease because of gut-mediated effects. The gut is not a coin slot. You could make a strong data-driven argument that the gut is where the vast majority of systemic regulation is happening. It's certainly not the brain. But the gut is where so much of the systemic body is being regulated. And so when we are consuming everyday pharmaceutical drugs like ibuprofen or combination birth control pills or steroids or serotonin modulating drugs. So many common categories of drugs. I already mentioned metformin, right? Proton pump inhibitors. All of these types of things are impairing the natural functioning of the gut. And in some cases creating disease on their own. They're the perfect key into the coin slot of badness. And it precipitates, and it doesn't happen overnight, but we've got to start looking for and thinking more about gut-mediated disease effects that are kicked off by various medications, right? It doesn't make those medications evil. Medications are a blessed part of our toolbox. We're very blessed to live in a time where we have so many of them. But so many medications are used as primary intervention or used as the one singular only long-term intervention. And there is no pharmaceutical drug in the body that is not a toxin. There is no pharmaceutical drug, even if it saves body parts and it saves lives. There is no pharmaceutical drug that does not have secondary debilitating side effects with ongoing use, sometimes promoting a secondary disease dynamic, in an astounding number of cases, an exacerbation of the original primary disease that it was prescribed to address in the first place. It doesn't make them evil. It means that they need to be a measured, intentional component of our toolbox that we use when necessary for very specific targeted periods of time, especially while we're helping someone to actually identify and address the root causes with sustainable lifestyle choices. And so these are some of the things we absolutely have to get in front of. I want to talk for a moment about some of the analogies that I use. One of the things that makes us really different about the School of Applied Functional Medicine is we teach a lot of in-depth, hard functional medicine science and what we call the devil in the detail practical application of that science in real-life complex cases. But you'll notice that I am sharing these points of interconnectedness and education about the body and how the body works with simple analogies and stories. We teach practitioners with these stories too, because here's the thing. If you use funny, interesting, fascinating stories that people can readily understand, they will make a completely different level of commitment to respond to what you're teaching them. If you're using geek speak in your clinical intervention and you're using a lot of fancy physiological and biochemical terms, mostly what people are going to feel is confused. They're going to still feel that the oversight of their health and wellness is over their head. It's too hard to understand. They won't ask questions because they're afraid of looking stupid, and they will be quote unquote compliant to what we as practitioners offer as long as they are afraid. As long as they are afraid. But when they're not so afraid anymore and they start to feel slightly better, maybe that change isn't necessary anymore. And here's the thing, they don't have enough knowledge on your watch to know whether it's okay to stop doing that thing or not. That is our failure. We've got to do better than that. Our task, our responsibility should be to educate, inspire, and empower a patient to actually understand what's going on in their body. And if you do it with an interesting or provocative story, they're going to go home and they're going to say, oh my God, you will not believe what's going on in my body. I finally understand. This is crazy. It makes perfect sense. And they're going to share some parking meter analogy, some plumbing analogy, right? Some basic, boring, everyday analogy or story that, you know, they're a normal human being. They're intelligent. They can understand it. And here's the thing. They feel empowered because they understand it. And they're going to tell the story to their spouse, to their friend, to their child, to their coworker, to their parents. And every time they tell it, their engagement in their own health is galvanized. And then if they start to sustain lifestyle choices and they get hard, they get challenging, because of course being healthy means being a deviant in our culture, right? There's nothing normal about being healthy. It can be challenging, but when they start to feel compelled to get off in the weeds and make different choices, now they're going to think twice, because now they know why it matters. Like, oh God, I don't want to eat any more vegetables, but you know, if I don't eat the vegetables, then I'm not feeding my mucus layer, and then all of those microbes and all that lipopolysaccharide is going to get in the wrong place, and my arthritis is going to come back, and that's going to be a pain in the ass, and I don't want that to happen. So yes, I'm going to eat the vegetables. This is where we want people to be, empowered to take back ownership of their health and holding themselves accountable for their choices, and not out of ignorance thinking that their choices don't matter. This is an essential component. So yes, I talk to my clients about how, you know, the gut, it's kind of like Las Vegas, right? We might want what happens in Las Vegas to stay in Las Vegas, but you know, this is the age of the internet and phone cameras and social media. And so, you know, what happens in Las Vegas does not tend to stay in Las Vegas. It's kind of like the gut. There's a lot of crazy, racy stuff that happens in the gut, and unfortunately, it doesn't stay there. It gets out. The body gets aware. Oh my gosh, holy crap, there's all of this craziness happening in the gut. And it gets alarmed, and it starts sharing the badness via the human social media pathway and gets alarmed. Yeah, Sin City in the gut, it's a problem, right? If you start using all sorts of fanciful language and geek speak with your patients, they're not going to tell people that story. They have no idea what you're talking about. They're just going to sit there like a deer in headlights and nod, right? That is not the most effective clinical engagement. It's certainly not going to create a savvy clinical partnership with a patient who's actually truly going to get well and stay well, as opposed to just chronically managing their disease and suffering the consequences of that. I also like to talk about the immune system, right? Reminding people that, yeah, the mouth and the gut is not a coin slot for whatever the heck trash you want to put in there. It is a precious garden. And most people don't walk out into their beautiful garden and throw rancid trash, you know, for sport, just because I don't feel like dealing with it otherwise. And so you want people to think, oh, what are you putting in your mouth? And teach them about the effects of highly processed foods and all of those chemical additives and unnecessary medications, because you're putting those in your system, and it's like throwing trash in your garden. It does not go away by itself. It does not. It sits there and wreaks havoc and becomes more smelly and more toxic. And then it starts killing your plants and starts to take over, right? You want to put that stuff where you know it can be safely dealt with, which is not in the body. But we can also talk to people about the immune system. One of my favorite stories is talking to people about the 2/3 of your immune system is in your gut. And it's constantly surveilling your world. And we have all sorts of sentinel cells, different antigen presenting cells in the gut that are constantly sampling everything that's going on. It's sampling little bits of your food, little bits of your microbes, little bits of the secretions that are out there. And it's just sampling to try and get like a feel for the status of your world. And, you know, we got to make it real for people. That doesn't sound very interesting. But if you say, hey, you know, you got 2 sentinel cells. They're named Bob and Fred. And you can imagine them down there in the intestines with their arms folded, watching you eat lunch, watching things come down, right? And are Bob and Fred going, yeah, look at that food, fantastic. I'm seeing some fiber and some vitamin A. Oh, there's some tryptophan, a little zinc. All right, I saw some polyphenols, saw some flavonoids. Good stuff, right? For the vast majority of people in our practices, Bob and Fred are standing there going, what is that? Dude, is that a food or a toxin? Is that a food or a chemical? In fact, I got to tell you, that food looks a little bit like that for an invader. Do you think we should counter that and attack it, or should we be nourished by it? What do you think? I'm not sure. They're confused. The last thing in the world you want is your own innate immune system struggling to figure out whether what's coming down your intestines is a food or a foreign invader. But the vast majority of things that we consume are sort of edible food-like substances, as Michael Pollan puts it, right? It's a real problem. A huge number of things that from our innate, passed down for millennia, generational learning in our cells as an organism has no idea what a Pringle is. What the heck is that? Is that a food, or is it a piece of plastic you accidentally ate? Is that a bandage? Is it a vegetable? Because I'm pretty sure there's nothing sort of vegetable looking in there anymore. There appear to be some carbohydrates. But yeah, I don't know. And if you didn't sleep very well last night, Bob and Fred are going to have a field day attacking everything, right? Versus if you slept well and you're relaxed, Bob and Fred might tolerate an occasional foreign invader, an occasional confusing snack coming down. But the vast majority of people in our practices, Bob and Fred are permanently freaked out because they know their job. But as far as they're concerned, we're about to die because there's no real food anywhere. I haven't seen anything truly food-like come down the pipe in a very long time. You're going to remember this story. If you turn around and explain that story to your patient, you think they're going to remember it? Heck yeah, they're going to remember, and they're going to tell other people because they finally get it and it's fascinating to them. And do you think they're going to eat another Pringle without thinking 5 or 7 times about whether or not that's a really good idea? For sure. They are going to take ownership because once you know what is happening, you can't unknow that. You can ignore it, sure. You can choose to say, understand it, got it, don't care. That's okay. The body doesn't wrestle with occasional exceptions. There's no need for perfection in a healthy choice. Mostly perfection makes people really stressed, overwhelmed, and sad. And there's nothing about that that's good for the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic system. But an occasional exception. It's the difference between what do we do 10% of the time and what do we do 90% of the time. If you teach people how things work in a way they can understand, if you inspire them with what's possible, and if you empower them with tools that they can find and afford and palate and sustain, they will take responsibility for their health. Because they do want to feel good. They do. It's just for the average person, it feels way too hard. And certainly there are people who couldn't care less. Just give me the pill. I don't care. That's okay. Cool. There's plenty of conventional allopathic medical outlets for them, but there is a massive flood of demand for integrative medicine, for naturopathic medicine, for functional medicine, for people who are looking to feel better and they're willing to change their lifestyle choices in order to make it happen. They want to own it, they don't know how. And this is where you are not only important, you are absolutely essential. And it's why here at SAFM, the way we teach is not designed to make you an erudite professor. There are plenty of other places you can go to get that. That is not our purpose. It's not our mission. We are teaching people a transformative training program in applied functional medicine science for people who actually want to do this work. Practitioners who don't want to just play around or dabble in functional medicine or be on the sidelines of healthcare transformation, which I'm not criticizing, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that. We need people in all sorts of stage of support for this movement of healthcare transformation. But our particular mission here at SAFM is to train the people who want to be in the thick of it, doing the work, actually enabling the healthcare transformation and practicing through the functional medicine lens every single day. Whether you're a physician or a nutritionist or a psychologist or a physical therapist or a nurse practitioner or a dietitian or a midwife, we have 20 different modalities at SAFM. There's so much more we could talk about. We could talk about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and SIBO, and how that in particular has to be addressed and acknowledged in order to stop the impairment in nutrient absorption, right? Even if nutrient digestion is optimal, nutrient absorption is so often impaired. We could talk more about all the functions of bile. My goodness. Do you know that the primary things that regulate insulin signaling in the body are in the gut? First stage insulin signaling is primarily controlled by incretins, which are released in the upper GI tract, right? Gastric motility plays a lot of this. Incretins are released in the duodenum in response to gastric motility. And so gastroparesis or accelerated gastric emptying both have an impact, a negative impact on insulin signaling. And further downstream, it's actually secondary bile acids that play a major role in insulin signaling. Fascinating, right? Lipopolysaccharides, right? Part of the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria that get into the systemic body because of enhanced intestinal permeability, impair the pancreas. If we end up with exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, we don't digest our food well, we overfeed the microbes, we have more wear and tear on the gut lining, we have more lipopolysaccharides, which further impair digestion. This is a vicious cycle that's happening in a lot of people in your practice. I just want to thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this movement, and I look forward to being with you next month.